here we go. And the Senate continues. The Senate report says, the committee's investigation uncovered a number of intelligence and security failures leading up to and on January 6th that allowed for the breach of the Capitol. Let me repeat that. The intelligence and security failures leading up to and on January 6th allowed for the breach of the Capitol. Those breakdowns ranged from federal intelligence agencies failing to warn of potential for violence, to a lack of planning and preparation by the U.S. Capitol Police and law enforcement leadership. Complete breakdown for all agencies. How is that not coordinated? I'm just asking the question. The committees, the federal, here we go. Here's bullet point number 1. I'm going to go through 4 bullet points with you guys. 4 bullet points that I think is important. I think that is important. The federal intelligence community, led by the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, did not issue a threat assessment warning of potential violence targeting the Capitol on January 6th. The law enforcement entities, all of them, largely rely on the FBI and DHS to assess and communicate Homeland Security threats. You're going to love this. Throughout 2020, the FBI and DHS disseminated written documents detailing the potential for increased violent extremist activities at lawful protest and targeting of law enforcement and government facilities and personnel. Here's the other bad misrepresentation in this report. When you're talking about throughout 2020 that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security had all these written documents detailing the potential for increased violent extremist activity at lawful protest that targeted law enforcement and government facilities and personnel, you're talking about Antifa. You're talking about Antifa and BLM in Portland, in Minnesota, in Seattle, and these other cities where they were attacking police officers. They burned down the police station in Minneapolis. They were burning down and trying to attack federal buildings in Seattle and Portland. That was all the George Floyd protests. That had nothing to do with the crowd that was coming to Washington on January 6th. But they're trying to blend these two things, and you can't do that. You can't blend it. Despite the online calls for violence at the Capitol, there were online calls for violence at the Capitol. Neither the FBI or Department of Homeland Security issued a threat assessment or intelligence bulletin warning law enforcement entities in the National Capital Region for any potential for violence. FBI and DHS officials stressed the difficulty in discerning constitutionally protected free speech versus actionable, credible threats of violence. Here's the problem. You had all this violence going on in the cities. The news media is calling it a peaceful protest while the city is burning down behind them in the camera shot. So they're saying, well, all that was going on, those were we had violence, we had attacks on police officers, we had attacks on government facilities, we had all this stuff going on through 2020. We were told to stand down, we were told to stand back, we were told not to engage, we were told not to arrest him. When we did arrest him, they just let him out. Well, this crowd that's coming to Washington on January 6th is a bunch of Trump supporters. It's not Antifa and it's not BLM. So we don't think there's going to be a problem. This is what I'm reading in here. FBI and Department of Homeland Security officials stress the difficulty in discerning constitutionally protected free speech versus actionable, credible threats of violence. They're seeing all these hotheads on social media saying we're going to storm the Capitol and we're going to threaten the Capitol, and they just didn't take it seriously. That's very possible. They just didn't take it seriously. They're like, well, it's not Antifa. We don't think these grandmas and grandpas coming down here to support Trump are going to pull like a Seattle or pull a Minneapolis on us. So they're like, is this going to be just a free speech rally for Trump? Or is this really actionable, credible threats of violence? Because they were picking up stuff on social media. And it wasn't on Parler. It was all over Facebook and Facebook Messenger. Parler had like 30% of it, and the rest of it was Facebook and Facebook Messenger. And all the big tech people closed down Parler, saying that it was all their fault. And it was all this stuff in the reports and in the intelligence gathering. Facebook keeps coming up over and over and over and over again. Facebook was letting this stuff brew. They were letting it brew. And they shut down Parler. Imagine that. Okay, I'm going to get back to this report. These points need to be made, though, seriously. They need to be made. Okay, number 2, bullet point number 2. The USCP, that's the U.S. Capitol Police, intelligence components failed to convey the full scope of the threat information they possessed. They knew something was coming. They didn't tell anybody. Although the U.S. Capitol Police mainly relies on the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security for intelligence and threat information, they also have 3 components. The 3 components are also responsible for intelligence-related activities. They have materials they produce. They're supposed to inform the Capitol Police security and operational planning. This was not the case for January 6th. The Capitol Police security and operational planning were never told of these security threats that DHS and the FBI had been picking up off social media. The Capitol Police lead intelligence component, the Intelligence and Interagency Coordination Division. Intelligence and Interagency Coordination Division. That means it's intelligence, and it coordinates all the intelligence coming in from all the different agencies. It's called the IICD. They were aware of the potential for violence in the days and weeks ahead of January 6th. They received information from a variety of sources about threats of violence focused on the joint session of Congress and the Capitol complex and the large crowds that were expected to gather in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Yet, the IICD, the Interagency Coordination Division, failed to fully incorporate this information in its assessments about January 6th and the joint session. As a result, the critical information regarding the threats of violence were not shared to the U.S. Capitol Police officers or other law enforcement partners. The preparations for the joint session suffered because of the decentralized nature of this intelligence component. On January 5th, check this out. On January 5th, an employee in a separate U.S. Capitol Police intelligence-related component received information about the FBI Norfolk field office regarding online discussions of violence directed at Congress. They were threatening Congress, including that protesters were coming to Congress prepared for war. This report, similar to other received by the IICD, were never distributed to the Capitol Police leadership or the planning prior to January 6th. Never told them. Bullet point 3 goes on to this. The U.S. Capitol Police were not adequately prepared to prevent or respond to the January 6 security threats which contributed to the breach of the Capitol. They had no idea this was coming. They were not even told the crowds were going to be there. And they were not set up for the joint session of Congress. This is blowing my mind. How can you're not even set up for the joint session of Congress? And I never could figure out how did you not know there were going to be 500,000 people there? Everybody knew it. The planes were sold out. The hotels were sold out. Everybody knew it. It was planned for weeks. And everybody knew it was going to be around the Capitol. The whole plans for the whole event. I showed y'all the map and showed y'all the plans for the event days before, the week before. We talked about it. They were supposed to meet in front of the White House. President Trump was going to do his speech, and then the whole crowd moved up around the Capitol. And then there was on the other side of the Capitol, up by Union Station, between Union Station and the Supreme Court, big staging area, and there was all these speeches all night long, started at 6 o'clock. It was all planned. They all knew. Nobody told the Capitol Police. And nobody had any plan at all. Nothing planned for the joint session of Congress that was happening at the same time of this. Bullet point number 3. I'm putting my rants in the middle of this report. The U.S. Capitol Police was not adequately prepared to prevent or respond to these security threats, which contributed to the breach of the Capitol. Stephen Sund, I want to know more about this guy. The U.S. Capitol Police Chief on January 6th, and Uganda Pittman, who was designated as an acting chief after Stephen Sund announced his resignation on the 7th. Yeah, he resigned fast. Both attributed the breach of the Capitol to intelligence failures across the federal government. U.S. Capitol Police leadership, however, also failed to prepare a department-wide operational plan for the joint session. They never even had an operational plan for a joint session of Congress. Excuse me? How do you not even have an operational plan for a joint session of Congress? Did those Capitol Police officers standing at those doors, when those guys came up the steps and they said, "Come on in and welcome to the Capitol," did they not even know there was a joint session of Congress taking place? Did they not even know that the whole entire House and Senate was in there the whole House was in there putting the vote together and certifying the election of the 2020 elections after all the chaos we'd been through? They didn't tell them. There was no department-wide operational plan for a joint session of Congress on January 6th. Similarly, now, we're going to talk about Nancy in a minute. Nancy Pelosi, as Speaker of the House, was solely in charge of the security of the Capitol when there's a joint session of Congress. The Speaker of the House, part of her duty and role, and this is a fact, is in charge of security of the Capitol for a joint session of Congress. She was in charge of this. It was her responsibility. Similarly, the United States Capitol Police leadership did not develop a staffing plan for the joint session of Congress, detailing, among other things, where the officers would be even located. The U.S. Capitol Police could not provide the Senate committees any documents showing where officers were located at the start of the attack and how that changed throughout the attack. The fourth bullet point, U.S. Capitol Police leadership also failed to provide frontline officers with any effective protective equipment or training. Although the U.S. Capitol Police activated 7 specialty civil disturbance units in advance of the joint session, only 4 of them even were outfitted with special protective equipment, including helmets, armor, shields. The many other U.S. Capitol Police officers who fought to defend the Capitol were left to do so in their daily uniforms. They weren't prepared. They didn't have anything to protect themselves. Many of the frontline officers had not even received training in basic civil disturbance since their initial recruit officer class training, While some of the officers were issued special protective equipment, they weren't authorized to wear the equipment at the beginning of their shifts. Instead, the Capitol Police staged all their equipment on buses near the Capitol. Even if they were authorized to have it, which most of them weren't, it was kept in a bus near the Capitol. They couldn't have it on. They were just supposed to be walking around in their regular uniforms. In at least one instance, when the platoon attempted to retrieve their equipment, the bus was locked, leaving the platoon without access to the critical equipment. Can you imagine when this riot starts breaking out and somebody says, "Somebody go get us some shields and some helmets," and they run to the bus and the bus is locked? Can you imagine the chaos? Can you imagine? God bless our police officers. It's not their fault. It's the fault of leadership. The U.S. Capitol Police also failed to provide equipment and training to support the CDU. The Civil Disturbance Unit. They didn't even give equipment to the Civil Disturbance Unit, and they did not authorize the Civil Disturbance Unit platoons to use less than lethal munitions. You know, if they had the smoke or the rubber bullets or anything to kind of fight the guys back, the ones that were getting violent, It would have enhanced the officers' ability to push back the rioters. Those operational failures were exasperated by the leadership's failure to clearly communicate during the attack. The leadership gathered in a command center blocks away from the Capitol building. Two incident commanders, two of the people in charge, that were supposed to be relaying the information, trying to tell us what was happening, they were forced to engage with rioters during the attack. They couldn't even relay information. Nobody knew where anybody was supposed to be. Nobody knew who was in charge. It was the Keystone Cops on the Capitol. As a result, communications were chaotic, sporadic, and according to many frontline officers, non-existent. Nobody knew who was in charge, who was supposed to be where, what they were supposed to do, what they were supposed to say. Are we supposed to let them in or keep them out, or what are we supposed to do? Number 5, opaque processes and lack of emergency authority delayed the request for the National Guard assistance. This is something else we were talking about. Days before leading up to this, the mayor of D.C., we talked about this live. We were handling this stuff live as it was going on way before January 6th ever happened. The mayor of D.C., Trump said we need National Guard. Trump knew he was going to have 500,000 people there, and he knew there was going to be a joint session of Congress certifying the election. He asked for the National Guard, and he had to get the mayor of D.C. to approve the National Guard. If you remember, and I've got to pull the tapes because it's on the tapes, we talked about this real time. The news stories came out as Trump, they wanted the National Guard. He got pushed back from the mayor of D.C. He said, you've got to have the National Guard in there. If you remember, before I even tell you what the report said, if you remember, I remember clear as day, they said, okay, we'll let the National Guard be in town. The mayor of D.C. did not want National Guard in there. She didn't like the look of it. She didn't like how it would look. She said they have to stay 3 blocks back. They can't have any weapons or anything. They can't be armed or anything. They have to stay 3 blocks back. You can use them for traffic control and crowd control only. That was the only thing they were allowed to do. Now, I remember this because I was reporting on this the whole week before January 6th. Now, the Senate report comes out and says, the U.S. Capitol Police Chief has no unilateral authority to request assistance for the National Guard. He must submit a request for assistance to the Capitol Police Board, the board. It's, your church board, try to get approval from your church board. It has to go to the board for approval. So Stephen Sund, the Capitol Police Chief at the time, he never submitted a formal request to the Capitol Police Board for National Guard support in advance of January 6th. This is the same guy who knew there was a threat assessment, who knew there were threats. He never gave that information to the operational planning people so they could plan for it. He never told anybody. He also never submitted a request for National Guard in advance. Instead, he had informal conversations with a House Sergeant at Arms who answers to Pelosi, by the way. The House Sergeant at Arms works for Pelosi. He had informal conversations with the House Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving, and the Senate Sergeant at Arms, who works for Chuck Schumer. Well, worked for Mitch McConnell then, Michael Stenger, regarding the potential need for National Guard support. He had an informal conversation with them saying, we might need the National Guard. No one ever discussed the possibility of National Guard support with the architect of the Capitol, who was the 3rd voting member of the board. The members of the Capitol Police Board who were in charge on January 6th did not to be familiar at all with the statutory or regulatory requirements for even requesting National Guard support, which contributed to delay in deploying the National Guard on the Capitol. During their testimony, this Stephen Sund had all kinds of different accounts. He first requested National Guard assistance during the attack. Phone records reveal a number of conversations between him and Paul Irving on January 6th, but there was no transcript of the conversations. There was no way for them to find out what time or what they were saying. And it was delayed and delayed and delayed until he was able to contact the board members and get approvals. These intelligence failures, coupled with the police board's failure to request the National Guard, assistance prior to January 6th meant that the National Guard was not activated, it was not staged, it was not prepared to quickly respond to an attack on the Capitol. As the attack unfolded, the DoD required time to approve the request and to gather, equip, and instruct its personnel on the mission, which resulted in additional delays. And they're saying before January 6th, nobody was saying we're requesting National Guard assistance. The D.C. government did request unarmed troops, I mentioned earlier, for traffic support, and on January 6th, 154 unarmed National Guard were staged at traffic control points across the city. As the attack unfolded, the Capitol Police and the Metropolitan Police and the District of Columbia Police, they pleaded with the Department of Defense for immediate assistance. Please give us the National Guard. DoD officials claimed they received a workable request for assistance from Capitol Police at 2:30 in the afternoon. It was presented to the to the Secretary of Defense and approved at 3 o'clock. But for the next 90 minutes, the DoD officials ordered the National Guard to return to the armory, get their gear, prepare for deployment, and as quickly as possible, prepare a mission plan. Miscommunication and confusion during the response, demonstrated by conflicting records about who even authorized the deployment and at what time, made it even more delayed. They didn't arrive to the Capitol until 5:20 p.m., nearly 3 hours after the DoD even got the request for them, and 4 hours after the barriers at the Capitol were first breached. This should have come up in the impeachment hearing on President Trump. That second impeachment, when they were blaming him for the Capitol, he is the one who ordered the National Guard. He was stopped. The mayor stopped it. The Capitol Police and all these people were saying no on the National Guard, not making any plan for it. Trump is the one who stood up and ordered it. That's not in the report, but we know it, we know it, we know it because we lived through it. We saw it with our own eyeballs. We saw it ourselves. We are witnesses. We saw it. We know he did. He ordered the National Guard. The mayor of D.C. said they cannot be armed and they have to be 3 blocks back and they can only direct traffic and crowd control. We were mad about that. We were upset about that. I was very, very, very concerned because it was a joint session of Congress and there was going to be 500,000 people there. And I addressed this for days and days and days before January 6th. And I said, oh, don't worry. It's going to be okay. They're going to have all kinds of security. It's going to be fine. Important note in the report, in great big bold letters in the executive summary, MJ, you're going to have to go back and watch this one, sister. You're going to have to roll back and watch this. This is serious. In big bold print, after the executive summary, big bold print, Intelligence and Interagency Coordination Division, that one I talked to you about, the IICD, possessed information about the potential for violence at the Capitol on January 6th, but did not convey the full scope of information which affected its preparations. They issued multiple intelligence reports prior to January 6th that reflected inconsistent assessments of the risk of violence at the Capitol. The intelligence products related to all the expected activities on January 6th, but the products were contradictory to the threat level. They never thought it had a threat level. They never thought it had a threat level. For example, a January 3rd special event assessment. Whenever you're having a big event in Washington, you guys, a lot of you have been, I've been to plenty of them. When you have those big events in Washington, there's a special event assessment. You're assessing who the crowd is. And making sure everything's secured, make sure the building's secured, Capitol secured, make sure the office is secured. The January 3rd special event assessment warned of the Capitol being a target of armed violence on January 6th. The assessment, I'm going to repeat this. The January 3rd special event assessment warned of the Capitol being a target of armed violence on January 6th. The IICD's daily intelligence reports rated the likelihood of civil disturbance on January 6th as remote to improbable. Even though they're hearing all this chatter from the QAnons and the Proud Boys and not the Proud Boys, it wasn't them, it was the Oath Keepers, and there was some other groups. It wasn't even the Proud Boys that did it. It was Oath Keepers and these other groups. They were hearing all this, seeing all the threats and everything, and they decided to rule it as remote or improbable. Even if it's remote or improbable, do you not even have a plan for a joint session of Congress? Do you not even have any plan whatsoever? No leadership, no plan, no coordination, no preparation at all. In big bold print, the U.S. Capitol Police did not prepare a department-wide operational plan or staffing plan for the joint session of Congress. How is that possible? Is there any time in the history of the United States when there's been a joint session of Congress that the Capitol Police did not prepare a departmental-wide operational plan or a staffing plan? There's always a staffing plan. There's always an operational plan for a joint session of Congress. Guys, I was lobbying in D.C. years ago, and our lobbying meetings ended in the convention center when there was going to be a joint session of Congress going on, and Netanyahu was speaking that year, I think, or the president was going down. Every road was blocked off. The security was so tight, it was insane. We were late for our lobbying appointments. It took us an hour to get from the D.C. Convention Center to our lobbying appointments, which were not even in the Capitol. They were in the congressional buildings, but every stinking road was blocked. The U.S. Capitol Police did not prepare an operational plan or even a staffing plan for a joint session of Congress on January 6th. Given that they were going to be certifying the vote of the 2020 election? Are you kidding me? In advance of January 6th, Stephen Sund, the U.S. Capitol Police Chief on January 6th, believed they would need support to secure a Capitol perimeter in light of the large number of expected protesters at the Capitol, but he did not order the creation of a department-wide operational plan. If you thought you needed to secure the Capitol perimeter in light of the large number of expected protesters, why were there no barriers around the Capitol? You had those little 2-foot things that people could kick over with their foot and go through. The normal barriers were not even there. Why weren't they there? He did not order the creation of an operational plan. Although the Uniformed Services Bureau and the Civil Disturbances Unit prepared some component-specific plans for their little groups, neither was sufficiently detailed to inform officers of their responsibilities. They were not sufficiently detailed to inform officers of their responsibilities or authorities, nor did they reference warnings concerning the special event assessment. Let me put that in plain English for you. There was a special event assessment, okay? They knew there was going to be all these people there. They knew it was going to be a joint session of Congress. They knew there were threats. They put in no place, no plan. They put in no levels of authority. They put in no leadership. They put in no securities. They did not inform the officers of their responsibilities. It's right here, the Senate. This is the Senate report saying this. They were not sufficiently detailed to inform officers of their responsibilities or authorities, and did not even reference any of the warnings to the officers. They didn't tell them what authority they had. They didn't tell them what their responsibilities were. We were wondering why the police officers were opening up the gates and waving the people in and opening up the doors and saying, "Come on in." Nobody told them that people weren't supposed to come in there. Nobody told them there was any operational plan for a joint session of Congress. Nobody told them, don't let the people get in because they might be mad because they're certifying the stinking vote. They were certifying the vote of the 2020 election that was under such huge controversy and protested by 7 states. 7 states' legislatures protested. It went to the Supreme Court. 18 states attorney generals sued to the Supreme Court to stop the certification of the vote. 7 states objected to the certification of the elections of their own states. And all this was coming down at the certification of the vote for a joint session of Congress on January 6th. They did not even tell the officers, put any operational plan, or make any pre-planning, and they knew the crowd was going to be there, and they knew the threat assessments. Are you kidding me right now? This is fact. This is the first 4 pages of a 128-page report. This is the executive summary, my friends. The executive summary. Nancy Pelosi is in charge of the security. This casual conversation happens. Oh, there might be... Guys, we need another investigation, but wait till 2022 to do it. Wait till 2020 to do it. Because you know what? This came out from Senate committees, and the Senate committees are ruled by Democrats, but at least they came out with the facts. At least they came out with the facts. I want to remind y'all of something. We all watched. This is totally mind-blowing. I mean, totally mind-blowing. I want to remind y'all of something. I want to remind you that at the impeachment hearing of the second impeachment, when the Senate was having the impeachment trial, the House impeached him in one day. It was a total joke. When the Senate was doing the trial, can we pull up that videotape, please? When the Senate was having the trial of the impeachment hearing, this stuff should have been in there. This stuff should have been in there because it was a complete breakdown by the security is what it says. That's why it happened. It says right in here why it happened. President Trump called the National Guard. That should have been in there. The whole impeachment. But if you remember, at the end of that, they were about to lose the impeachment vote. And one of the prosecutors, I think it was Stalwart, stood up and he said, I make a motion that we hear witnesses. We need to hear witnesses, because he thought they were going to lose the vote, which they did. But he wanted witnesses. And everybody got excited. All the Democrats got excited. Oh, let's bring forth witnesses. Let's get all these witnesses to talk about all the terrible things that happened on that day. And they were going to have to go in days. They actually made a motion to hear witnesses. Somebody seconded the motion. Then they voted and they cleared the motion. And then they took a short recess. Well, right before they took the recess, Lindsey Graham, who is the master of strategy on Capitol Hill, I mean, the man has strategy. He's absolutely brilliant. I backed up. I said, oh my God, what is going on? Lindsey Graham stood up and said, you want to call witnesses? Let's call witnesses. We'll agree right with you. Let's call witnesses. And the first witness we want to hear from is Nancy Pelosi. We want to know what Nancy Pelosi knew and when she knew it. She was in charge of the Capitol Police. We want to know what she knew and when she knew it. And that is the first thing we're going to find out from every witness we call up in here right now. Well, they kind of freaked out. They took a little recess and they came back and they broke procedure. They broke the rules of the hearing, of the impeachment. They completely broke the rules and backed up and says, we decided we're not going to call any witnesses. The threat of having witnesses come forth and find out what Nancy Pelosi knew and when she knew it made them back off, and they said, no, we're not going to call any witnesses. We'll go ahead and call for a vote. We'll go ahead and call for a vote. Lindsey knows. Tom Cotton knows. I bet you Devin Nunes knows. I'm telling you what, Devin Nunes was up talking about this report today. He was on Newsmax right when this report came out. Guys, I'm going to get into the rest of it. I've only gotten through half of it. It's 128 pages. It came out a couple of hours ago. Boom.